What happens when a woman entrusted to uphold justice crosses every boundary of morality and law? Tonight, we unravel the chilling story of Judge Clarissa Montero, a respected California judge whose hidden desires, reckless choices, and shocking violence destroyed not only her career but also two families. What began as a night of alcohol, secrecy, and forbidden passion ended in a brutal killing, and the unthinkable downfall of a woman who once ruled from the bench. There are moments in life when temptation knocks, and we either resist or open the door. But what happens when that temptation belongs to someone much younger, much too close, and completely off limits? Clarissa Montero, at the age of 54, had spent decades telling others how to live within the law. Yet, in the shadows of her private life, she danced closer and closer to breaking every rule. This isn't just the story of a crime. It's the story of hypocrisy, of lust turned violent, and of power corrupting the very person who was supposed to protect it. Before we unravel this disturbing true crime story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dive crime documentaries. If you enjoy long-form crime breakdowns that go beyond the surface and truly explore the human flaws behind the violence, this channel is for you. Now, let's begin. The courtroom was her stage. Every morning at precisely 8:30 a.m., Judge Clarissa Montero swept into Department 12 of the Los Angeles Superior Court with the commanding air of someone who had spent her life behind the bench. Her black robe was crisp, her silver hair pinned immaculately, and her gaze sharp enough to silence a crowded courtroom. To the lawyers who appeared before her, she was both feared and respected. Prosecutors admired her decisiveness, defense attorneys dreaded her intolerance for delay, and jurors felt the weight of justice when she spoke. For over 25 years, Clarissa had been the final voice in countless lives, murderers sentenced, fraudsters punished, families torn apart or made whole again. From the outside, she seemed untouchable. A symbol of integrity. A model of law and order. But every symbol has cracks. Clarissa lived in a sprawling Spanish-style home on the outskirts of Beverly Hills, perched on a quiet street lined with palm trees. The neighbors admired her success but knew little about her personal life. She rarely attended neighborhood barbecues or joined community socials. She kept to herself. Behind those arched doorways and wrought iron balconies lived a woman far different from the stern judge seen in court. At 54, Clarissa was divorced, childless, and profoundly lonely. Her marriage to a fellow attorney had ended a decade earlier in a bitter fallout over infidelity. Her husband had chosen a younger woman, leaving Clarissa with a bruised ego and a hardened heart. Since then, her life had been consumed by work. By day, she was Judge Montero. By night, she was simply Clarissa, pouring a glass of Chardonnay, staring at the silent glow of her pool, and wondering if this was all her life would ever be. Her one constant companion was Arturo Mendez, her driver. At 68, Arturo had once been a mechanic before transitioning into personal driving services. He had worked for the Montero family since Clarissa's marriage, first chauffeuring her and her husband, then remaining with her after the divorce. He wasn't just an employee, he was woven into the fabric of her daily life. Arturo was quiet, dependable, and fiercely loyal. Every morning, he was at her doorstep in a neatly pressed suit, ready to whisk her to court in her black Mercedes. He carried her briefcase, opened her doors, and reminded her to eat lunch when she forgot. When she came home exhausted after grueling trials, he often prepared light meals for her before heading back to his modest apartment. Sometimes, they would sit together in her kitchen late at night, sipping tea, sharing fragments of conversation. He told stories of his younger years in Mexico, of his late wife, of his pride in his only son, Mateo, who was just 22. Clarissa, for all her sternness, often found herself comforted by Arturo's presence. But she kept him at a distance, always polite, always professional. He was, after all, her driver. Still, Arturo noticed things. He noticed how she lingered too long in silence when the car ride was over. He noticed the emptiness in her eyes after long court days. He noticed the unopened mail from family, the untouched birthday cards, the absence of photos of children or grandchildren. Clarissa was surrounded by authority in the public sphere, but she was utterly alone in the private one. And loneliness, like water wearing away stone, had been eroding her for years. That summer, the cracks deepened. At the courthouse, Clarissa presided over an especially gruesome murder trial. Day after day, she listened to testimony of betrayal, violence, and greed. The defendant was a wealthy man who had killed a business partner, and his arrogance irritated her to no end. Yet while she condemned his selfishness in court, she found herself reflecting on her own inner void. At night, she poured more wine than usual. She flipped through social media, staring at pictures of smiling couples, engagements, vacations. She remembered her youth, how desired she once felt, how men admired her confidence. Those days felt distant now, as though she had been left behind. One evening, after a particularly long day in court, Arturo drove her home. "You need rest, Judge," he said in his soft accent, placing her briefcase on the counter. "Rest?" she muttered, pulling off her heels. "Rest only reminds me how empty this house is." Arturo frowned. "You have everything: success, respect. People admire you." Clarissa gave a dry laugh. "Respect doesn't keep you warm at night, Arturo." The driver said nothing. But that silence, that compassionate silence, stirred something in her. For a brief moment, she resented him for being the only witness to her vulnerability. And then there was Mateo. Arturo's son had begun stopping by occasionally to help with odd jobs, carrying groceries, fixing the pool heater, trimming the hedges. Mateo was young, strong, with a careless charm. He was studying part-time at a community college, trying to find direction. Clarissa couldn't ignore him. She told herself she was only being kind, only taking an interest in the boy because she respected Arturo. But late at night, lying awake in her king-sized bed, she caught herself replaying their conversations. The way he laughed. The way his eyes lit up when she complimented him. And in those moments, a dangerous thought crossed her mind: what if? The image of the respected judge remained intact for the world. But inside her private mansion, a storm was gathering. Loneliness had turned to longing. Longing turned to temptation. Clarissa Montero, the woman who had judged the sins of thousands, was now tiptoeing toward her own. And neither Arturo, nor Mateo, had any idea how far she was about to fall. The summer evenings in Los Angeles carried a strange kind of energy, warm breezes drifting through bougainvillea-covered fences, the scent of jasmine heavy in the air, and a pulse of nightlife that never seemed to end. For Judge Clarissa Montero, though, nightlife was not clubs or concerts. It was wine poured into expensive crystal glasses, jazz records spinning in the background, and long stretches of silence broken only by the hum of her pool filter. Until Mateo began showing up more often. It started innocently. Arturo had pulled a tendon in his shoulder and couldn't manage heavy lifting for a few weeks. Clarissa had ordered some new furniture for her upstairs office, sleek shelves and a carved mahogany desk that required assembly. "Judge, my son will help," Arturo had explained one morning as he opened the Mercedes door for her. "Your son?" Clarissa raised a brow. "Yes. Mateo. He has strength, energy. And he could use the extra money." Clarissa gave a curt nod. She had seen Mateo once or twice before, tall, broad-shouldered, with a mop of dark hair and a quiet smile, but never paid much attention. That afternoon, though, when he arrived in a fitted t-shirt and jeans, hauling heavy boxes up her staircase with ease, she noticed him differently. He was no longer just a boy in her peripheral vision. He was a man. As days passed, Mateo's presence became more frequent. Sometimes he came just to help Arturo polish the Mercedes. Other times, he trimmed the hedges or cleaned the pool. Clarissa, curious, began engaging him in small talk. "So, Mateo," she asked one afternoon, leaning against the doorway as he worked on the pool filter. "What are you studying?" "Business administration," he replied, brushing sweat from his brow. "Part-time. Honestly, I'm not sure if it's for me." "Few people know at your age," she said, swirling a glass of iced tea. "When I was 22, I thought I wanted to be a teacher. Look how that turned out." He laughed lightly, his eyes briefly meeting hers. "Yeah, my dad says you always knew what you wanted, to be in charge." The remark struck her. To be in charge. Yes, that was how people saw her. But here, in her own home, she felt strangely powerless. Watching Mateo work, she was reminded of everything she wasn't anymore: young, carefree, full of possibility. And with every conversation, the lines blurred further. It was Arturo's birthday that marked the turning point. Clarissa, out of habit, insisted on hosting a small dinner at her home for him. She invited no one else, just Arturo, his son, and herself. The evening began with laughter. Arturo told old stories about his youth, about meeting his late wife at a dance hall in Guadalajara, about working 3 jobs when Mateo was born. Clarissa listened politely, sipping her wine, but her gaze drifted often to Mateo, who sat across the table in a crisp button-down shirt. The conversation shifted to lighter topics: music, films, life in Los Angeles. When Arturo excused himself after dinner to take a phone call in the garden, Clarissa and Mateo remained at the table, finishing their drinks. She leaned forward, her chin resting on her hand. "You look so much like your father when he was younger." Mateo chuckled nervously. "That's what people say. But you're different too," she said, her voice low. "Bolder. Less afraid." The words hung in the air. Mateo looked down at his glass, his fingers tapping against the stem. Clarissa felt a thrill rush through her, dangerous, intoxicating. When Arturo returned, nothing more was said. But from that night onward, something had shifted. Clarissa began inviting Mateo more often, sometimes under the pretext of chores, sometimes simply to keep his father company. Arturo, ever trusting, saw nothing unusual. But Clarissa knew better. She lingered longer in conversation, let her laughter flow freer when Mateo was near. One evening, when Arturo was busy repairing something in the garage, she and Mateo sat by the pool. She poured him a glass of wine, hesitant at first, then insistent. "You're old enough," she said with a sly smile. "Besides, it's just 1 glass." 1 glass became 2. 2 became 3. The moonlight shimmered on the water, and Clarissa's hand brushed against his as she refilled his glass. Mateo shifted uncomfortably, his chest tightening, his thoughts tangled between respect for his father's employer and the strange magnetism pulling him toward her. "You shouldn't," he whispered once, almost to himself. But Clarissa only leaned closer, her perfume surrounding him, her eyes unwavering. Arturo never suspected the depth of what was happening. He trusted Clarissa. He trusted his son. One late evening, while he was driving Clarissa home after a gala, she asked casually, "Do you ever worry Mateo hasn't lived enough?" Arturo chuckled. "He's still young, Judge. Life will teach him." Clarissa stared out the window, hiding a smile. She wasn't thinking of life teaching him. She was thinking of herself. The night it happened was deceptively ordinary. Arturo had driven them both back from a courthouse dinner and was too tired to return to his apartment. Clarissa offered the guest room downstairs. Mateo came by later to pick something up from his father and stayed for a drink. Wine was poured. Jokes were shared. Laughter filled the once empty mansion. But laughter gave way to silence. And silence gave way to something else. As Arturo slept in the guest room, oblivious to the storm gathering upstairs, Clarissa and Mateo crossed the line. A line that could never be uncrossed. The woman who had spent decades guarding justice had surrendered to temptation. And in that surrender, the seeds of destruction were planted. The sun rose slowly over Los Angeles, casting golden light through the sheer curtains of Clarissa Montero's bedroom. Dust motes floated in the air, catching the glow as if the room itself was holding its breath. On the rumpled bed lay Clarissa, her silk robe slipping off one shoulder, her head heavy with both wine and the decisions of the night before. For the first time in years, she felt a strange mix of exhilaration and dread. Beside her, the sheets were empty. Mateo was gone. Clarissa sat up, her temples pounding. A faint trace of cologne lingered on the pillow, mixed with her own perfume. Her heart raced as she realized the magnitude of what she had done. She was 54. He was 22. The son of her driver. The rational part of her brain screamed at her. "You're a judge. You've destroyed your career. You've betrayed Arturo. And yet, Another part of her pulsed with excitement. She hadn't felt desired like that in years. Mateo's youth, his touch, the way he had looked at her, it was intoxicating. Downstairs, she heard the faint creak of the front door closing. Mateo had slipped out silently, as if the night had never happened. But Arturo wasn't blind. That morning, Arturo was already in the kitchen when Clarissa descended the stairs. He was making coffee, his posture unusually rigid. "Good morning," he said flatly. "Good morning," Clarissa replied, trying to sound composed. She reached for the newspaper on the counter, though the words blurred before her eyes. Arturo's gaze lingered on her slightly disheveled hair, on the faint traces of makeup smudged beneath her eyes. He had seen Mateo leave. He didn't need confirmation. Finally, he set the coffee pot down with a firm clatter. "Judge. I need to ask you something." Her stomach clenched. "What is it, Arturo?" He hesitated, as though searching for the right words. "I saw my son leaving your room early this morning." The air thickened. Clarissa set the newspaper aside, her hands trembling slightly. "You're mistaken," she said quickly. But Arturo's expression hardened. "Do not lie to me. I may be old, but I am not blind." The kitchen, usually a place of comfort, now felt like a courtroom. Clarissa, used to commanding trials with ease, found herself cornered in her own home. "Arturo, listen," she began, her voice softening. "Mateo is an adult. What happened, it wasn't planned." His face twisted in anguish. "You seduced him." Clarissa bristled. "He wanted it as much as I did." The words slipped out harsher than intended, but they hung in the air like poison. Arturo's hands curled into fists on the countertop. "He is my son. My only son. Do you understand what you've done? You've taken advantage of him. You've taken advantage of me." Clarissa's eyes narrowed, her defensive walls rising. "I've given you everything, Arturo. Steady work, respect, a place in my life. And this is how you repay me? By accusing me? Repay you?" Arturo's voice cracked with fury. "You destroyed my family's dignity in one night." The two stared at each other, one with rage, the other with desperate pride. For the first time in decades, Arturo wasn't her loyal driver. He was a father whose trust had been shattered. That day, Mateo didn't come by the house. He didn't answer his father's calls. Clarissa paced her living room, sipping glass after glass of Chardonnay, replaying every detail of the night before. Was Mateo ashamed? Regretful? Or was he keeping silent to protect her? The uncertainty gnawed at her. She wanted to believe he felt the same pull she did, that the night had been more than just a mistake. But doubt grew louder with each hour. Over the next week, the house became a pressure cooker. Arturo's polite demeanor shifted into icy professionalism. He still drove her to court, still carried her briefcase, but the warmth was gone. The quiet loyalty was replaced by cold formality. "Your car is ready, Judge," he would say without looking at her. "Thank you, Arturo," she would reply, her voice brittle. The distance burned her. She felt like a criminal in her own home, guilty without a trial. One evening, she tried to mend the silence. "Arturo, can we talk?" He shook his head firmly. "There is nothing to say. I serve you because it is my job. But I will never forgive you for what you did." The words cut deeper than any verdict she had ever delivered in court. The breaking point came late one Friday evening. Clarissa had returned from a long session in court, exhausted and irritable. Arturo parked the car in her garage, his silence unbearable. Finally, she snapped. "Are you going to punish me forever for one mistake?" she hissed. Arturo turned, his eyes blazing. "It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. And I won't let you bury it. If you think you can continue as if nothing happened, you're wrong. The Judicial Council will hear of this. Everyone will know." The blood drained from Clarissa's face. "You wouldn't dare." "I would," he said coldly. "You're not above the law." Those words. One she had spoken to countless defendants over the years, came back like a curse. You're not above the law. For Clarissa, reputation was everything. It was her identity, her armor, her power. If Arturo went through with his threat, she wouldn't just lose her job, she would lose everything. As Arturo walked away that night, she felt something inside her snap. Fear curdled into rage. And deep in the shadows of her heart, a dangerous thought took root: if he destroys me, I will destroy him first. Over the next few days, the tension escalated. Arturo began avoiding eye contact with her. Mateo grew distant, ashamed of what had happened. And Clarissa, rather than feeling guilt, felt anger. In her distorted mind, Arturo wasn't just a driver anymore. He was an obstacle. A liability. A man who could ruin her career and reputation with a single confession. On the night it happened, Clarissa had been drinking heavily again. Arturo picked her up from a private dinner party and drove her home. He was quiet the whole way, his knuckles tight on the wheel. Inside the garage, Clarissa suddenly lashed out. You think you can destroy me? Do you think anyone will believe you over me? She slurred. Arturo remained calm, but his silence fueled her rage. She grabbed a heavy object from the back seat, a metal flashlight, and struck him across the head. The elderly man collapsed instantly. But Clarissa didn't stop. Blow after blow, she rained down until Arturo lay motionless, blood pooling on the car floor. Breathing heavily, Clarissa stared at what she had done. The reality was undeniable: she had killed the man who had served her family for decades. But panic set in. She dragged Arturo's body toward the rear of the garage, covering him with a tarp. She scrubbed the car, washed her hands, and tried to erase the evidence. She thought she was clever. A judge who knew how investigators worked. But she underestimated the simplest truth: blood always tells a story. Mateo returned later that night to check on his father. When Clarissa greeted him with trembling hands and blood still faintly smeared on her blouse, suspicion filled his heart. He searched the garage. And what he found shattered him. His father's lifeless body, hidden beneath the tarp. Mateo's scream pierced the night. "What have you done?" he cried, collapsing beside his father's body. Clarissa, desperate, tried to reason with him. "He was going to ruin us, Mateo. He wanted to expose everything. Don't you see? I did this for us." But Mateo recoiled in horror. The passion of days before was replaced with disgust. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. Within minutes, sirens blared outside Clarissa's luxurious home. Officers swarmed the property, cuffing her as she shouted incoherently about betrayal and justice. Her career was over. Her freedom was gone. And her robe of authority was stripped from her forever. The courtroom where Clarissa once held power now became the stage of her downfall. The evidence was undeniable: Arturo's blood on her clothes, the murder weapon in her garage, and Mateo's testimony of what he saw. The prosecution painted a picture of arrogance and corruption. Judge Montero believed she was above the law. But no one, not even a judge, can get away with murder. Clarissa's defense tried to argue intoxication, emotional breakdown, even self-defense. But the jury wasn't convinced. After weeks of testimony, the verdict was clear: guilty of second-degree murder. Clarissa Montero, once a respected California judge, was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. And so, the story ends where justice always finds its way, inside a prison cell. Clarissa Montero thought her robe gave her power over truth, but in reality, truth has a way of breaking free. Her lust for youth, her fear of exposure, and her unchecked rage cost an innocent man his life, and destroyed 2 families. The gavel that once symbolized her authority now only echoes in memory, reminding us that no one is above the law. What do you think drove Clarissa more, her fear of losing her reputation, or her obsession with Mateo? If you were on the jury, would you have given her a harsher sentence, or shown her mercy? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this story as haunting and eye-opening as we did, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who follow true crime stories. Your support helps us keep producing these long-form breakdowns that reveal not just the crimes, but the psychology behind them. Stay safe, stay alert, and always remember, evil often hides in plain sight.